Hello and happy October to all my followers. Thanks for joining me on this journey as I explore books by authors of color. And today I want to talk about Babel by Rf Quang. But before I talk about Babel, for those of you who haven't read the Poppy War Trilogy, I have to get into just how amazing that series was so you can fully understand why I pre-ordered this Waterstones edition of the book before I even knew what it was about. Because that's how much I trust Rf Quang after reading this first trilogy of hers. Despite her being quite young, she's an amazing author and one that I will continue to follow for quite some time. Babel is the latest magical adventure from Rf Quang, and while many are familiar with the Poppy War, I want to get into some more details, so this will contain spoilers for the Poppy War. There were times in the Poppy War Book 1 that I got the taste of the power of the Pantheon. Perhaps because I knew the final book was called The Burning God. Like Rin and many others in the series, I could taste the power in its allure. It called to me saying, just watch, and I will show you how everything burns. The Burning God is a continuation of the war that was the focus of the Dragon Republic, but it is also an exploration of the power of the gods and the way power corrupts. The last third of the book is some of the most fast-paced of the series. I could feel the flow of the story and went along for the ride as it drew me to the epic confrontation. After a clash of the gods, unleashing their full power, the war is over, or so it seems. Thankfully, Kuang does not stop there. The fighting over the course of the trilogy has decimated the country in ways that are hard to imagine. While one war is over, other enemies loom, and the people are suffering. This leaves Rin with an impossible choice. Continue fighting at the expense of her people, or give in and throw away everything she fought for. The ending is polarizing, as all good endings should be. In some ways it's maddening, others heartbreaking, and others satisfying. Or maybe just all three. Even in those final moments, the story ties back to the beginning and some of the characters' time spent together at Seingard. A brotherhood forged in fire, bonds like family. I held off on judging the Dragon Republic because I had to know how things ended before I could rate the entire series. Unlike most trilogies, the stories do not tie up in convenient bows at the end of each book. This is because the story of the horrors of war is never ending. Each conflict repeats the horrors of the past as leaders repeat the same mistakes. Few leaders last long enough to pass on the wisdom of years of rule. The Poppy War as a trilogy is not for everyone. It is at times one of the most brutal fictional tales I have read. Rin's battle with opium addiction in earlier books is not easy to read, and she is not the only one with this struggle. Many complain that the series is gratuitously violent. Mostly, those people are not aware of the brutal history upon which it is based. The atrocities described aren't from the imagination of some twisted author, but a retelling of a tale many have forgotten or never learned. I did not learn of the Sino-Japanese War or the brutal atrocities committed by the Japanese, or at least not properly, in high school. I would have remembered something like that. I learned of this shameful chapter through Hardcore History's Supernova in the East, which opens up this conflict. Yet somehow I felt compelled to read further, and slowly worked my way through Retribution by Max Hastings, which is one of the sources for the Hardcore History podcast. I have friends who doubt they will ever read the trilogy, and I hope they will stick to that. For those who can't look away, be prepared for a harrowing journey. Kuang wrote a deeply engaging trilogy and has grown as an author throughout. The details come through in The Burning God, making the world much more realized, while the characters travel through vast territories I never felt lost. This is thanks to the exposure to the same areas in past books. The characters are also unique, enough that I did not have a hard time keeping track of them. The Burning God is a powerful ending to a powerful and beautiful trilogy. And so it was after that that I was so excited to read Babel. And that's why I pre-ordered this edition, because I just knew Babel was going to be amazing. So I pre-ordered the Waterstones UK after reading the full title of the series, of the book, Babel, or The Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. Babel was such an amazing book that after I finished, I decided to get this amazing Fox and Wit edition, because how can you say no to that cover, especially how well this book fits with the themes and looks next to the shiny Waterstones edition. So, as many of you know, I don't typically like to buy a lot of physical books, but Babel is special, and it's a standalone, which makes it even better because I don't have to make room for a whole bunch of books in a series. I pre-ordered that edition, and at the time I knew absolutely nothing about it. But thanks to Harper Voyager and NetGalley, I was able to read an early copy of this book and rant about it for months before release and get all my friends to read it. It has now since been released. But now I'm going to read some from my original review because I think it's best to stick to what I wrote before. Babel entices with the lure of pure knowledge, like those questions that absorb you through hours of research or internet rabbit holes. It is a tale of friendship, life as an outsider, and found family. Babel is a reminder of the lure of the quest for knowledge. Each of the four main characters is distinct and compelling. Set in Oxford in the 1830s, Babel is bursting with etymology and linguistics. The lessons never felt out of place or boring, despite our characters sitting through many lessons throughout the book. The silver magic requires a deep understanding of languages, making language a natural part of the story. The plot moves quickly, despite being primarily historical fiction, and Kuang gives the world energy through her engaging writing. I plan to take my time because when I had the digital arc, I didn't really know how long the book was, and I thought this was maybe a 600, 700 page book. Turns out it's only about 550 in the US release and the UK. But by the time I got to the last quarter, I basically couldn't stop, as I'm sure many of you have experienced with this book. Babel is amazing and sure to be on my top 10 list for the year, and so far it's the best standalone book that I've read this year. I don't expect anything to top it as standalones, but we'll find out. Babel is a scathing critique of the British Empire, told through the story of four friends, and it will set the standard of dark academia for years to come. Now, just like the history I described behind the Poppy War Trilogy, there's a deep history behind Babel, and that's what I loved so much about it, is you can tell from reading it that Kuang was really into the history that's weaved through the stories. So it just happened that I read Babel after finishing The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, a professor of global history at Oxford, thanks to a recommendation by R.R. Verdi, the author of the first binding, which I will cover in a future video. Much of the domination of India and China by the British Empire explored in Babel is based on history. Sadly, this is not the version we learned in elementary school, which barely touches the surface of reality. So if you finish Babel and wish to explore this history more deeply, you should definitely pick up The Silk Roads. It is an excellent book, and the audiobook is engaging and well read. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and come back for more, because I am working on an epic video for the first binding to explain to everyone just how amazing it is. And as a reminder, this series of videos and this channel is dedicated entirely to authors of color. And while I will review and tweet about books by white authors, I intend this video series to focus entirely on authors of color, because they need all the help they can get to counter those absurd, racist one-star reviews that I shouldn't have to know about and they shouldn't have to deal with, because they're not nice, and that's why we have the option like this to spread the word. So I hope you enjoy this video and come back to see more about the first binding later this year, because it's going to be an amazing video. And once again, take a look at these amazing covers of Babel, because it's a beautiful book and it deserves to be on your shelf and all your friends' shelves. There's a lot of editions out there, a lot of different covers to choose from, so you can find the best one that fits for you. And I hope you enjoy this video, Have a great October.